So good evening. We have lots of folks joining us, so we're just going to let folks filter in for the next minute or two, and then we'll kick this off. So we still have lots of folks coming in. We're going to let it run for about another minute, let folks join us, then we'll get started. So good evening and welcome to the Six Colleges webinar series. My name is Jim Bach and I'm Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore College. And I'm joined by 5 of my colleagues. I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and we'll start alphabetically with Amherst College.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt McGann. I'm Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Amherst College.
Hi, everybody. I'm Whitney Soul. I'm the Dean of Admission and Student Aid at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Art Rodriguez, and I'm Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Allen. I'm Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Pomona College.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Creighton, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Liz. And often the first question we get is how these colleges came together. And we have a history of friendly rivalries, but we decided to set those aside because we really wanted to share information with you, particularly during these challenging times. This is actually a continuing series that started in late August and will continue through late October. We encourage you to visit sixcolleges.org to see sessions that have already been recorded. We've done sessions on financial aid, sessions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this night's webinar will be recorded. I want to let folks know that it will not be closed captioned live, but we will add closed captioning to the recorded session and we'll post that in a couple days. So we encourage you to take a look at that. Tonight's session is about applying in the time of COVID. We know that the admissions process is fraught with anxiety and some fear, and particularly as we lean into the onset of the pandemic, those anxieties have been heightened, and particularly with ongoing racial injustice. But we also recognize that this is a time of excitement and hope as seniors are moving from high school and making the transition to college. And we are thrilled that you're taking time to be with us this evening, and we look forward to learning more about you and reading about you in your applications. We also understand that there are a lot of external factors that are beyond your control and some beyond our control, but we hope to share some advice and strategies to get through this year together. We also want to let you know that we practice holistic admissions when rendering decisions. We look at every piece of the application before making a final decision. There are no algorithms, there's no computers, there's real live human beings reading the work that you put into this. And we know you're going to do really well. Our view, it's not a question of if, but where you will go to college. We encourage you to apply to a range of colleges that are on your list with varying selectivity so that you'll have some really good choices come next spring. So with that, let's get started. And we're going to do something a little bit different in the vein of liberal arts, which is innovative, creative. Typically we have the Q&A and we share sessions, but we wanted to start it tonight first with a word cloud. So we're going to try to put that word cloud in the chat. And you'll see it here. It's 6 College 747. It's getting out on the bus. We're getting on the plane. We can't be with you in person, but we want to know, when you think about college in one word, what are you most excited about? Again, this is a time of excitement, a time to look forward and think about the 4 years post high school. So I'm going to look to Janie to see if we can post that. poll live and to let you know that it's just one word. So I think you may have to enter a username. We're not going to record this, but once that poll goes live, we can see what you guys are putting in there. This is great. Intellectual discussions, the people. So we'll let this run for a little bit. We want to know what's on your mind and what excites you about college. And it looks like you can put in phrases, which is great. Excellent. So we're going to hang on to that, and we're going to save that also for the end because we wanted to start with what excites you. What we realized tonight is about applying in the time of COVID. So we're also going to try something new. We're going to try a poll, which we haven't done. As we've been on the road and traveling virtually, we've heard from students, we've heard from families, we've heard from counselors, as well as community-based organizations. And there are about 5 or 6 themes that have been lifted up that are of concern to families in this coming year. So instead of us deciding what was most important, we thought we would share with you, the collective, a poll, and you tell us what is most important on your mind. So we're going to see if we can offer that poll up to folks. And there it is. So what are you most worried about in your college search process? And you can choose one. And then as that poll completes, we'll let it run for about a minute. And the deans are going to answer these questions and these concerns, but we don't know in what order. So again, we're going to be thinking on our feet a little bit here. We've been answering a lot of these questions, but again, given that there's so many people joining us this evening, we want to direct the conversation to you and know what's on your mind as we move through this. So what are you most worried about in your college search process? Test and test optional process, not being able to visit my top schools, disruptions to my academic work, disruptions to my non-academic work, including clubs, athletics, performances, extracurricular activities, affording college, and the ever critical, my essay or personal statement. So give everyone a chance to check that. And again, we don't know the outcome of the poll either, so we'll see if that pops up here in a minute. Hope everyone had a chance. So we'll ask our Q&A support, Janie, to post the results. And the poll is ending. And there we go. Wow. All right. There's some clear winners here. So I would say the top one with the red line is not being able to visit my top schools. So I'm going to turn this one over to Seth Allen and Art Rodriguez. And if the two of you could address not being able to visit my top schools.
You know, maybe I'll start. I think one of the good things that has come out of this global pandemic is all of the schools, certainly the 6 here, but I imagine all of the schools you may be looking at have dramatically increased their resources to allow you to get to know colleges and universities that might be on your list. And I hope you've taken advantage of some of those. You're able to sit from the comfort of your home or wherever you are and listen to an information session that used to be delivered in person. Many institutions, I know mine, we set up appointments with faculty. We have sessions with students. We brought a lot of program, actually far more than we used to have in person when you visited campus, to allow students to really get a flavor for what's going on campus. I'm imagining it's something similar to what's happening at Carleton, Art. How are you thinking about it there?
Yeah, thank you, Seth. We're thinking about it along the same lines. You know, we understand that, you know, by the nature of being closed for the health and safety of our community, that we're not expecting students to have to step foot on our campus. Like Seth mentioned, we're really interested in providing virtual opportunities for students to connect with us, to connect with admissions and student financial services staff, to connect with our faculty, to connect with students at the college, and even other staff members who might be overseeing and managing programs that, as a prospective student, you may have questions about. And we're doing our very best to make sure that we provide opportunities for these individuals to be available and have these conversations with you. So, you know, I agree. I think that with Seth that we have attempted to try to expand our options in terms of what we might provide virtually, but we understand as well that stepping foot on a campus is something that I think we all appreciate, and you really get to enjoy the culture and space of a place. And we do hope that soon enough we'll have that opportunity to return to allowing visitors to come to campus, but I think we are attempting to do our very best to make sure that you understand us, that you get a feel for us, that you can at least capture the opportunities both extracurricularly and academically that our institutions have to offer through the various different virtual opportunities that we're providing.
Excellent. So bringing the poll back up here. Sorry, we didn't capture the entire poll. So we're going to work our way through this. The next I'm going to pass to Liz and me, and it's about my essay and personal statement and how that may be handled differently this year. And I think that includes sort of the optional essay as well. So Liz, if you can take that one.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm happy to. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. So I'll offer a couple of thoughts, and then Jim, I'd be curious to have you chime in as well. So first things first, I think I just want to address the optional essay or section that's been added to all the various applications, common application, coalition application, QuestBridge application, about the impact that COVID has had on your high school experience, on your family dynamic, whatever the case might be. I think we'd all agree that that section is really for you to use if you think it will help provide additional texture or shed additional light on the circumstances surrounding your application, on the context in which all the other information in your application should be considered. So everybody should feel free to use it, to share whatever details feel meaningful and central to you. You should not feel any pressure to use it. And that's true certainly for the six of us. I think that's probably a question that you'll have to do a little bit of research about at all the schools that you're interested in. We were talking as a group the other day, and I know there are some state flagships that are asking every student to answer that question. But across the six of us, we want that to be a resource that you can use to give us additional information, but we don't want it to be sort of an additional hurdle that you feel like you have to get over in order to submit your application. So that's a little bit about the COVID portion of the essay. Jim, do you want to talk a little bit about the standard personal statement part of the application?
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it's the common application, the coalition application, the QuestBridge application, they're going to give you several prompts, and we're less concerned with what you do, or it's more the whys versus the whats. And we often don't share that, but what we want to see is some analysis. Most 17-year-olds are really good at description and describing things. So oftentimes they might write about a grandparent or someone they admire a great deal. And by the end of the essay, we're really excited to admit grandpa. But we've often not learned about you and what motivated you or what inspired you about your grandfather to make you want to pursue X, Y, or Z. So again, we want a little bit of analysis as opposed to the description. There aren't really off topics that you should avoid. Sometimes you might stay away from politics, but again, you don't know who's going to be reading the essay, but it's a writing sample. It's not a college thesis. It is limited in the number of words, and we just want to know that you can write. We recognize that some people may have got a lot of help on the essay. Sometimes we'll get a question from a parent that said, we're working on the essay here. And our first question will be, hang on one sec, who's working on the essay? So again, some of you may have started it as a junior assignment in high school, been edited several times. Some of you may have written it at the last minute, but we hope, like anything, you'll work on drafts to present that essay. Some may work the first time, you may want to try 2 or 3 times. Again, we realize it is one sample in time, but it can give some insight or maybe share something about your background. But again, we want to see a little bit of analysis versus description, and we know it's something you can do. I often do a workshop where I show essays that worked and essays that didn't, and oftentimes there's some giggling because folks can see a poorly written essay, or when they reuse words, or when they talk about in sometimes the Y college essays, they'll forget to change the name in the essay. So again, proofread your essays. Again, they don't have to be perfect. We're not grading them, but we just want to get a sense of who you are and sort of hear your story.
Jim, I'm going to jump in with one more thing. And I don't even know if everybody on the screen would agree with this, but when I have the chance to do essay writing workshops, one of the things I always like to start out reminding students of is, I think in a lot of ways, the personal statement or the essay gets a disproportionate amount of attention in the application process. So one of the things that Jim mentioned at the start of our time together tonight is that we all practice holistic admission. And so what that means is your application is one important component that we pay attention to, but it's one of many components. And so I think it's important to remember that the essay matters for all the reasons Jim just described. Writing is an essential part of the curriculum on all of our campuses. And so it's important for us to see your writing ability and your interest in writing. It's important for us to learn more about you and hear how you reflect on your experiences. But your essay, the topic you write about, how you write about it, is never going to be the thing that leads to you being admitted or not at any of our schools. And so I think it's important to try to take sort of relieve yourself of a little bit of the pressure to write the perfect essay. First of all, that's probably not achievable. And even if it is, it doesn't mean that it will lead to an offer of admission. So I think, as Jim described, you want to use the essay as a way to tell us something meaningful about you that maybe isn't shared elsewhere in the application, but remember that it's just one part of a much broader process.
And thank you, Liz. And as we looked at the survey, the top two responses were essays and not being able to visit my top school. So I'm going to ask Whitney and Matt to discuss the next two most popular. One would be test and test optional. And if we can then also discuss non-academic disruptions, because they seem to get a good share of the vote at 27 and 25%. So I'll pass it to Matt and Whitney.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We're happy to talk about test optional. There was a question in the chat, is the SAT required at these schools? And the answer is that all 6 of our schools this year are test optional. For 5 of us, including Amherst, this is something new. And those of us who are new to test optional have been spending the entire summer and now into the fall really trying to think deeply about how do we transform our process to not advantage or disadvantage people who have or do not have tests? Because ultimately, in this holistic admission process that Jim and Liz have both mentioned, we're not really interested in test scores for their own sake. What we're interested in is finding those students who will academically thrive on our campuses. Test scores are one way of quite a few that we can get a sense of that, but by no means are they the only way. So we're going to look to your entire application to look for that evidence of your academic preparation, your fit with our academic missions, how much we think you will thrive on our campus. And if you have an SAT or an ACT score, we'll consider that. If you don't, we won't. And test optional really means test optional. In a little while, we'll share a link to a document that we're all signatories to, along with hundreds of other college deans, really trying to let you know that test optional does mean test optional. If there aren't tests in your area, if you don't feel safe testing in your area, if you tested and you don't feel your scores represent you, in all of those cases, do not worry. We are ready to do it. And part of the reason why the 5 of us that are so that are new to being test optional are so confident that we can do this and bring in a class that is well aligned with our mission even without it is because the 6th school here has been doing it for half a century. Bowdoin is the pioneer of test optional admission. This is clearly a very different year, Whitney. How's that conversation going in Brunswick?
Thank you very much, Matt. And I agree with everything that Matt said around test optional. And Bowdoin was actually the first school to become test optional. It was in 1969. And Dick Mull was our dean at the time. He was also one of the founders of the Common Application. So a man who was really thinking about how to consider access and re-envision what a college process might look like, even way back then. And the point of all of that is that because it's been so deep in our history, Bowdoin has had decades of working through developing an academic review system in our application process that relies on the materials that are required of all of you. And all 6 schools share those requirements, which would be your transcript or transcripts, the profiles that your schools send, along with the transcripts to help us understand what the course selections and course naming and grading scales and so forth mean at your school. And we all consider what curriculum has been available to you and what choices you've made and how well you've done with those choices, all relative to your own environment. And what we have seen over time, because we've had a long time to research this and to validate what we're doing, is that that basis for academic review, looking at your transcript like I just described, and understanding the work that you've done academically in the context of what's available to you, along with your writing and how those who recommend you talk about you as a learner, are ways in which we get to know you and predict how well we think you'll do adapting to the environment of our academic school. And it's a very solid predictor. And one of the things that we can see, having had time to research this, is when we do have testing available, it is usually additive in the same direction. It's not likely that the testing that we have changes in any meaningful way what the outcome might be for a student at the end of the first year. And if we were to look at the test scores alone for the students who sent them to us, they were not as good a predictor as those other elements together in the way that we use them. So we've been able to prove to ourselves that testing can be additive, but is not a strong enough variable on its own to really move anything in one direction or another. That's really done by the combination of other materials that I was describing. But the other thing that's important is we have had this option for so long, and consistently over these decades is usually somewhere between 2/3 or 3/4 of the applicants to Bowdoin submit their test scores, and about 1/3 to 1/4 don't submit any standardized testing at all. And those ratios or proportions have stayed the same throughout time. Our applicant pool has grown from, at the time that policy went into place, it was probably a little over 2,000 applicants a year, and now it's about 9,400, and certainly much more diverse in every possible way. And yet those proportions of test submitters and non-submitters have stayed about the same. And they carry over into each enrolling class too. They're very similar. For each enrolling class, about 1/3 to 1/4 did not submit any tests. But we know this year is different because those ratios that we're familiar with in our history represent an applicant pool where everybody probably has taken tests, and then they're making a choice about whether or not to submit them to us. This year, we know a lot of you can't take tests or are choosing not to take tests because it's not safe. And there isn't one school here, and for every school that says that they're test optional, the reason that Matt was saying we really mean it is there's nothing that we would want you to do to put yourself in harm's way for the purpose of a piece of application material to our schools. And if you're in an environment where it is not a safe place to be able to take a test, or you're just not able to access a seat, we're really sensitive to that. And so I imagine that things will look different at Bowdoin this year too, even though it's been our policy for so long, because I think a lot of students, some may have them and choose not to send them, and then there will be many students who aren't even making a choice because access to the test hasn't been realistic. So I hope that allays some of the concerns.
And again, we answered the top 3. There are 3 more non-academic disruptions, also affording college and academic disruptions. At a given time, we did want to share a few resources with you. We'll come back to some of these in the general Q&A. And again, in terms of affording college, I want to let you know there is a recorded session on financial aid, a full hour just on that. So we'll also encourage you to go there. But again, I don't want to lose those 3, but I do want to go to the general Q&A. But we wanted to just put up a quick screenshot now at 7:25, and then we'll post it again right before 8 o'clock when we end with some helpful resources for you. The first is NACAC, test optional means test optional. NACAC is the National Association for College Admissions Counselors, which is our professional association. And they put out a statement and encouraged admissions deans to sign on. And I believe we're all signatories saying that test optional means test optional. So please check that out. Also, there's the Making Caring Common Statement, which comes out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And they've lifted up the importance of caring in the crisis, in times of crisis. So it's an alliterative title. And we are also all signatories to this. We have always cared, but the question is, have we been transparent about how we lean into holistic admissions? And the idea is that you need to care for yourself before you care for others. And we know there are a lot of challenges. So care is first and foremost in your health and your education, but we recognize that and we'll lean in that together. And the third one is Big Future. And this is the College Board, and you're probably all familiar with the College Board. They administer the SAT, the AP, or Advanced Placement Program, but you may not know they have a really robust website called Big Future, which offers resources for you to research colleges, to start a list, to narrow a list, and to also find about affordability and how to apply for financial aid. So we encourage you to look at these resources. With that, we will remind you, in fact, you've already done it, which is fantastic. You're putting questions in the Q&A, so we're going to turn to that. And again, they'll probably overlap some of the main ideas that we didn't get to. But the first one I'm going to pass back to Seth. And Seth, we actually had some questions early on that weren't in the top 6 about demonstrated interest, what that is, and do they need to show demonstrated interest, particularly because they can't visit campus or attend a high school visit in person?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. I can respond to that briefly. So demonstrated interest, if you're not familiar with the term, is essentially showing love to colleges. Colleges pay attention to that because if they elect to give you an offer of admission, they want to know that you're serious about potentially enrolling at that college. Not every college uses demonstrated interest, but for those that do, even in the time of COVID, that may be something that you want to look on their websites to determine if that's something that they express as something that they look at in the admissions process. If they do, it's obviously very different virtually, but what it meant pre-pandemic was that you showed up if they visited your high school. If they were at a college fair and you're at a college fair, you stop by and show interest in asking questions, just getting to know the school, possibly signing up for an interview if you were able to and had the time and the resources to do so, that you visited campus. All of that actually doesn't really apply now, but with all of these virtual offerings that colleges have, if they do express that demonstrated interest is important, you should get on their mailing list. You should sign up and do some kind of a virtual tour or virtual information session. And that way you can show that, yes, you are doing the research and you are putting in the work to truly get to know the institution. That generally satisfies demonstrated interest for those institutions that ask for it in the admissions process.
Thank you, Seth. And Art, I'm going to pass one your direction. We've had a couple questions about this, about essentially, is there room next year for us? How many students deferred? Are you going to be admitting anyone? And you know, how will that impact the incoming class?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer, Jim. So we all have space in our classes. I think that's the most important message to leave with this evening. You know, we have seen a number, and maybe in some cases a greater number of students take a gap year from the class of 2024 and have decided to delay their start until the class of 2025. But we're all looking forward to continuing to admit a robust number of students to this incoming class, and are looking at ways to make sure that we manage that well. You know, I think some of us are thinking about increasing, you know, our class size for this year, recognizing the fact that we have more students who took a gap year. And these are the conversations that we're all trying to sort through and sort of put in place to make sure that that we're not really disadvantaging anybody who might be applying to colleges this year, because we want to make sure that we have space for you. And that's really our focus in thinking about the coming year.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass it back to Liz. We did have questions, or 25%, I think, were interested in non-academic disruptions, Liz. So in terms of activities and how they talk about that, and I'll put it in context of several questions that were asked. A student asked that I did a lot of service work actually during COVID, but it was only for a year. Should I mention that in the COVID part, or is that in my normal list? So if you could just talk a little bit about the non-academic disruptions and how students should address that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I think I'll start with is I think we can all agree that we don't want you to waste any energy on worrying too much about where information is shared in your application. I think if you feel like you can best narrate for us what's gone on with your extracurricular activities in that COVID essay section, we'll be happy to review it there. If you prefer to use the activities chart, that's typically a standard part of the different application platforms, that's fine too. So this will differ student to student. And we've said this in lots of other sessions over the last couple of weeks, but flexibility will be the name of the game this year. And that will be true when we're reviewing information in different parts of your application. I think sort of we're all starting from a similar place in assuming and expecting dramatic disruptions to your extracurricular activities. In some cases, they were paused. In other places, in other cases, they were canceled entirely. So we're going to be looking at how are you spending your time leading up to last spring, when things started to get turned upside down. Certainly, if you chose to fill your time during the pandemic with new activities, we'll be happy to hear about them, though we don't have the expectation that anybody found new ways to spend time. I think we can all agree that merely making it through the last several months healthy and whole is good enough. And on some days, I think we all feel like we aren't quite there yet. So, so we don't expect that you began a new service endeavor over the last 6 to 8 months, but if you did, again, we'd be happy to hear about it. We recognize too, I know when the pandemic first started, everybody was talking about things being paused for last spring and the ability to pick activities back up this fall. And I think we now all realize that that was wishful thinking, and we recognize that for many, those pauses have been much longer than you initially anticipated. I think I just want to express on behalf of all 6 of us that these are the kinds of things that are out of your control. They're the kinds of things that are playing out on our own campuses, that are plaguing our own students as they're trying to redefine what their extracurricular lives look like, as they're looking ahead to opportunities post-graduation and wondering how changes in their activities will impact them. So we have significant awareness and deep empathy for all that you're going through. And I just want everybody to rest assured that we want you to tell us as much as you possibly can about how you were spending your time pre-pandemic, what got in the way of those activities since. We are going to consider all of those things with a lot of humanity. And again, in the context of all the other things that are shared in your file, what your teachers tell us, what you write about in your essay, the way you persevered in the classroom despite all of these challenges you faced. And so it'll be a significant part of your story, but it's one that we're ready to hear and that we're really excited to respond to.
Great, thank you, Liz. And Matt, I'm going to pass one to you. I'm going to go back to our session, our poll, because we had about 25% who are interested in academic disruptions. And if you could talk a little bit about that, and as opposed to non-academic disruptions.
Yeah, a little bit earlier, I told you that one of the things that we think about deeply in our holistic review is about our academic mission and about finding those students who are well suited for our academic mission and who will really thrive on our campuses, in the classroom and beyond. And test scores tell us a little bit about that, but the best predictor of that is, and I think always has been, your performance over 4 years of high school. The courses that you choose to take and how well you perform in those courses. Now, things maybe were going along nicely for many of you, and then the pandemic hit and turned our lives upside down in many ways. And one of the ways is the disruptions to our academic lives. So at your schools, and actually at our colleges, you saw courses go online, grading systems change. So schools that were grading ABC or on a 100-point scale maybe move to a pass, fail, pass, no record, credit, no credit. I've seen lots of different approaches to this from schools. And even still today, many of you are completely online. Some of you are doing a hybrid thing where you're in school some of the time and you're out of school some of the time. Some of you are in school, but in a very different way. Course offerings may be significantly changed from what you would have expected in the past. Those of you who are in AP or IB or similar kinds of curricula had a lot of changes to the way that those tests were offered in the spring, and who knows how that will go this year as well. And we're all very aware of those things. That's my point here, is that we know, we've been talking about this since the spring. We have been trying to best understand how can we center you and your situations, not just applying one size fits all to all situations, but really trying to do that holistic review, trying to understand the challenges that you faced and the opportunities that you've had and what you've made of those challenges and opportunities. That is at the center of a holistic process like those offered here. Now, what you can do is you can do your best to use the application to tell your story. If there are things that happen to you academically or otherwise, you can use that COVID question. You can use other parts of the application to give us some insight into how things changed from how things normally would have been for you. The more context we have, the more that we can consider and properly understand your application in the context of all that's happened. So we're going to be flexible. Like Liz said, that's the name of the game this year.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to pass this next one to Whitney. And Whitney, we're getting several questions about early decision and early action on two levels. One, if you could just define the difference between early decision and early action. Do we have those still in the time of COVID? And what students are asking is, should I or can I make an early decision choice when I've not been able to visit campus this year? And so several questions around that, and that I compiled into one for you there.
Sure, I'd be happy to go with this question. So let's first divide up early action versus early decision. I think all of the schools on the panel tonight are early decision schools. And that means that if you're applying under an early decision program, you're signing a commitment that if you are admitted and your financial aid works for your family, then you will be planning to enroll at that school. And if you have any other applications submitted to other schools, you would withdraw them. So for us as admission reviewers, you're a sure thing. If we admit you, we know we're going to land you in the class. And that's pretty exciting for us because our job is to build a class with individuals. And so as we begin to put one person after another into the class with early decision, we know a student's going to be there. That's a pretty exciting way to get started. Early action is often not binding. Now, some schools do have rules about, even though it may not be binding and meaning that you're not obligated to enroll if admitted, some schools do have rules around how many places you might be able to submit an early action. So you may hear restrictive early action, meaning there's some boundaries around how you can do that. Other schools may not mind if you apply to multiple schools in an early action. Typically that means you have an earlier deadline, you have an earlier response, but you're not obligated to commit earlier. But as I said, our schools are all early decision schools. And the way the question was bundled from Jim is that something that schools are going to be leaning on this year? Is that a good thing for a student to choose to do if they haven't had a chance to visit? And so I'm going to sort of unpack both of those. As I was saying earlier, for us in admitting students in early decision is exciting because we know for sure that those students are going to be part of the class, and it's really exciting. I would also say that for our schools, applying early decision doesn't increase your chances of being admitted in any meaningful way because our admission standards aren't different between early decision and the regular round. What we are able to do is see students in the early round who we know we want in our class one way or the other. If you were to apply early, if you apply regular, you're someone that we know we want to have here, and we're going to take the opportunity to seat you in early and know for sure that you'll be part of the class. I think whether or not a student should be thinking about applying early without having seen schools in person is really a personal decision, and it might partly be a financial one. all of the schools here have very robust student aid policies. We meet full need. We have an opportunity to really support our students financially throughout the 4 years, not just through financial aid packages, but also through services on campus. And so we feel pretty confident that when a student has applied to one of our schools' early decision and we're aiding them and the aid package is available at the time the student's been admitted, that the offer that we are providing will be fully supportive for the student to attend our school. But for some families, we understand why this could be really nerve-wracking to be making a commitment and a financial one without being able to compare. And so there's a couple things to say about that. We did do a session on affording college, as was mentioned earlier. And so we went into some of the ways that families in advance can investigate how much a college might cost. And you can do that without any sort of commitment and can have one-on-one conversations with student aid offices. And that may give you an idea in advance of being in a binding commitment about what you might see in a financial aid award. So that can be helpful. But if you really feel like you need to compare financial aid awards, then maybe early decision isn't the right way to go. And you might really want to apply in the regular round so that you can not only see different places where you've been admitted, but also to compare the costs among those offers. I would also say that if you are someone who really feels you haven't had enough time to pick a favorite, early decision would not be the right thing to do. It is, for our schools, like I said, it is not going to increase chances of admission in any meaningful way. And you might be relieving yourself of the opportunity to be admitted to a number of schools where you get to decide later when you feel you have a little more information. So early decision, because it's binding, really is meant for students who know for sure. Let's say you applied to all 6 of these schools, but you know if you got into this one particular school, you would definitely go. That's where you would go if you had multiple offers. Then you might be a good early decision candidate, and we'd love to review you in the early decision round. So I hope I got to all the points that you listed there, Jim.
Yeah, you did. Thank you, Whitney. I'm going to pass the next one to Seth. Seth, we're getting a combination of questions, but I thought we'd combine them into one. People are saying because of COVID, maybe they've had experiences that they wouldn't have had without COVID. And so it's about supplemental recommendations, or teachers that may not have, they have had as often, or they were working remotely. And then tied with that, someone talked about an art supplemental ranking. Can they show interest in an activity? How do they do that? And should they submit if they don't want to major in art or music? So it's about supplemental art submissions as well as recommendations. And is that different in the time of COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thank you, whoever asked those questions. So, you know, on the one hand, in the admissions process, we seek a lot of information. I think many of us think the more information, the better we're going to be able to read an application. And yet there's a fine line there, because there is a point of having too much information. For example, if you felt it necessary, if it was even possible to submit 8 letters of recommendation, that would be too many. We simply wouldn't have the time to read that number and scale that to any meaningful number of students in our applicant pool. So I would urge you to be careful about how much information you provide, while at the same time, please, if there's something really important that we need to know about you, please, you have the liberty to submit that to us. So in this unusual time, if there are people who have a real bead on who you've been during the COVID pandemic, who can give us some insight into how you've responded, how you've handled, how you've impacted, whatever it is that you think it would be important for us to have a sense of, by all means, ask that person to write a letter of recommendation. But I would limit that for most of you to no more than 1 additional letter of recommendation. And for many of you, I'm not even sure that's necessary, unless it truly is new and meaningful information for us to consider in the admissions process. The supplemental question for talent, say in the arts, either visual or performing arts, that may vary a little bit from school to school. I think we like to understand where you may inhabit on our college campuses. Generally, we offer supplemental review in music and the arts for students who want to be really serious in those areas. So for our faculty who are trying to put together choirs and orchestras, it's important for them to be able to see your talent and see whether you would fit with the program. And I would say the same thing with visual arts and theater and dance. you're certainly welcome to submit those, but unless you're planning on being really serious and you have a talent to contribute, it's not going to meaningfully impact how we view your candidacy in the admissions process.
Great, thanks, Seth. And I've got one for Art, but before I get there, I'm just going to answer one quickly. And it says, if we have application-specific questions, should we ask the regional admissions counselors or the dean of admissions? We do have email addresses. Many of us have territories. Often we break the country and the world into regions. So you can usually find that on our websites, or if you write directly to our admissions offices, our staff will share those questions. So again, feel free to write to us, but we do have staffs that are tied to regions typically. So please do share those questions with us, because we probably won't get through all of them tonight. The next one I'll pass to Art, and it has to do with financial aid. So it's a combination of going back to our final topic about affording college. And again, we did have a session on that, so we encourage you to listen to that. But Art, some of the questions are coming in about, is there any money left since people took a gap year? Are you going to have as much financial aid? What happens if I go early? Because they heard Whitney speak and say, but if I can't afford it, can I not go to college? So just a little bit about affordability. And then there was one, I think, from a parent about required forms, which maybe you don't need to get to. That was addressed in our last session, but really just about affordability in the time of COVID.
Well, I'll start off by saying that I responded to the question about the CSS profile for the parents, and so hopefully that response will be helpful to them. And then in regards to financial aid, we all have adequate financial aid available at our institutions. And in fact, I would say part of what brought us together is the fact that we've made this commitment to continue to make our colleges affordable, recognizing the fact that much has changed for many of the students who will be applying to our colleges, and we'll be responsive to that and ensuring that we are able to make our colleges affordable. I think if you view the last session we did on affordability, there'll be many of the questions around, is there extra financial aid available? What happens if the tax documents from 2 years ago that colleges typically use to determine financial aid, what if my family situation has changed? Again, we're going to respond to that and recognize that the situation may be very different than it was 2 years ago. And so, again, take a look at that video. I think it'll help answer many questions. But again, the commitment from all of us is to ensure that we continue to seek students who would really engage and take advantage of the opportunities at our institution. And we're going to provide that financial aid when you apply, if you qualify for financial aid, based on the circumstances that your family may be dealing with at this point in time. There was one more question, Jim, and early decision and financial aid. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think one of the things to recognize with early decision is that even though it is a binding program, we all recognize that as students apply and learn about their financial aid offer from our institutions, that sometimes what was expected of families maybe isn't exactly what they're finding in a financial aid package. In those cases, we always encourage you to first start by coming back to our financial aid offices and having a conversation about, did we get all the information that we needed from you? Are there circumstances that have changed for your family that we should be aware of, where we might adjust your financial aid? In the case where we've done a review, we've had several conversations with the family, and there is a divide, at least the family feels that there's a divide in what we can provide in terms of financial aid, and what the institution is able to offer. At that point, we often will release students from that binding agreement. But there are lots of tools out there for students and families to utilize. Visit our websites. There's a net price calculator. There are other most of us offer My Intuition, which is a quick college financial aid estimator. Use those tools. They provide great information to give families a sense of what it might cost to attend our institutions. All of us also have great financial aid staff who are willing and able to have conversations about maybe some specific circumstances that you might have questions about in utilizing those tools. And so make sure that you're spending time to ask those questions and and utilize the tools that we have available. Last point, there was a question earlier about whether or not our colleges offer merit scholarships, and I just want you to be aware that our financial aid policies are to meet 100% of demonstrated need. And if we do offer any merit scholarships, it might be a very small proportion of students who might be receiving that. The majority of our financial aid is based on demonstrated need. And so again, questions around these terms, these definitions, I think can all be answered by watching or rewatching the session on affordability. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Art and Liz. Several questions are coming up, and it's sort of a follow-up to our discussion earlier about test optional. And sort of the question is, what is the future? Are these one-year pilots? I assume we might have some families who have younger students on the line, or maybe juniors versus seniors. And do we know enough yet? And part of that, there was a question which may have been answered, but again, there are lots of questions, which is great. So I apologize if we already answered it, but just clarification between test optional versus test blind. So future of test optional and the difference between test optional and test blind.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. So I'll take the definitional question first. So the term test optional means that it's up to you as students to decide whether or not you want to submit test scores. And if you do, schools will consider those as part of their holistic admission process. If you don't, they'll still practice holistic admission without that, that one data point. Schools that are test blind, it means that whether scores are available or not, they won't consider those scores in any way in their admission process. So all of the schools on the screen tonight practice test optional admission. So you have the choice to submit scores if that's the right choice for you, but you should feel no pressure to if you haven't been able to take them or you would prefer not to. To the question of whether test optional will continue beyond this year, I think I can probably say with confidence for Whitney that Bowdoin will continue to be test optional beyond this year as they have been for the last 50 years. And I think for the other 5 campuses represented here, this is very much a sort of topic of conversation on our campuses. So most of us made this change to a test optional policy this year in response to really the desire to make sure that students could be as safe as possible during the course of the pandemic. But as is the case every year, we are constantly sort of reviewing and reassessing our admission process to figure out what we can do to make it better, make it stronger, make it more accessible. And I think this is one of those moments. So I think we're all having important conversations on our campus about what the future of standardized testing looks like. I suspect we will all continue to make standardized testing at least an option that students have to submit. Whether a test optional policy might become a permanent thing will depend campus to campus. These are conversations that take a long time and involve lots of people on our campuses. But I think probably what's shared among the 5 of us for whom this is right now a temporary policy is an understanding that for those of you who are juniors or for family members who have younger students on the call, you need information about this sooner rather than later. And so I think we're all trying to make our way through the process on our campus so that we can get information to you as soon as possible. And we hope to do so in the sort of late winter into early spring so that as you're preparing for what next spring and summer and the fall of senior year might look like, you have as comprehensive information as possible. So we will work on that, and I promise that when we have updates one way or another, that's the kind of really important information that we will push out to you via email and on social media and on our websites. So stay tuned to us that way, and we'll be sure to let you know as things evolve.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to pass one to Matt, and then we'll have one, probably time for one question after that, that I'll have for all the panelists. But Matt, we're getting questions from families just about, we hope things will get better. We don't know the future. Will there be options for families next spring, assuming we're in a similar situation? So we knew families this year had options to gap, go remotely, or in some cases be on campus or in remote. So can we predict the future there, or is it just too early?
Predict the future, huh? You sound like my board of trustees. We're hoping that when we get to May that things are looking a little bit better, but all of our schools have always offered the opportunity for students to take a year away before joining our campuses. Sometimes it's called a gap year, although that makes it sound a little more ritzy than perhaps it needs to be. There are a lot of really terrific ways that you can spend a year stepping away from formal education. And we're seeing a lot of students do that this year. And for those of you who find yourselves at the end of this academic year, tired, needing an emotional boost, wanting to connect with people in a different way, considering a gap year in all kinds of different ways, whether it's doing service work, doing regular work, whatever is available to you, I think can be a great option, and I expect that that will remain an option for our schools. I don't really think it should be any kind of admission strategy to take a gap year to like game the odds of COVID or something. But you know, I find that in the many years that I've been doing admission, that those students who make a plan for a gap year, take a year away, and then join the college the following year, they come back with a clearer mission, a greater sense of what their education means. So I think that can be one option to consider. Of course, we're all hoping that we have fully residential education in the fall. We're all making plans to welcome you for orientation programs next fall, to be able to have in-person classes and dorms and everything. We're rooting for those vaccines and for everything. But I expect that we'll continue to show the same kinds of flexibility that we did this year in a whole bunch of ways, and hopefully in some ways even better with a little bit more time to make those plans. So we're going to be here for you, and we want to meet you when you're ready.
Great, thank you, Matt. And the last question that will sort of go around with everyone, will start with Art, but we want to know, and folks want to know, what excited you most about college, if you can remember back then. So Art, what excited you most? Well, so we'll end where we started.
It was in some ways leaving California, moving to Minnesota. So I graduated from Carleton. So being a part of that community was really important to me, and just a new experience in a different state.
Excellent. And Seth?
I loved taking a variety of classes and going really deep in the areas I'd never, ever touched in high school. It was eye-opening.
Excellent. And Liz?
I'm going to piggyback on Seth and say the course catalog. Like Art, I'm an alumna of Williams, and I still have my big fat purple course catalog from my freshman year at Williams with all post-its attached to it. You take class at Williams before you graduate. I think I had something like 200 classes tagged with post-it notes when I first went through the course catalog. So just the opportunity to take classes in subjects I didn't even know existed in high school.
Great, thank you, Liz. I'll go next and then pass it to Whitney and then Matt, and then I'll close this out. So for me, it was the excitement of leaving home. I'm originally from Austin, Texas, never dreamed of attending a small liberal arts college, 1,600 miles away from home. Like Seth and Liz, it was the courses, the conversations, and it was the best decision I ever made. I also didn't think I could afford it, much less get in, but it made all the difference. So from there, I'll pass it to Whitney.
This is such a fun question. Two things. One, I had moved a number of times as a younger person, and so starting over in a new place wasn't exactly a new experience, except it was really different in college. It was just this big array of choices that I felt were mine, sort of like what Liz was describing with the course catalog, but it was in everything. It was in what I could study, it was activities that I could try, how I spent my time. It was just an open frontier of really great choices, and 4 years did not seem like enough time, which is why 30 years later, I'm still working on a college campus. It was a great experience.
Thanks, Whitney and Matt.
Yeah, as a first gen to college student, the whole college thing was eye-opening. One thing I was really excited for was the peer group, being with a whole group of students that had chosen to come to a place together, that they were all as excited about learning as I was, and we were learning together. The people at college are a big thing that makes it.
Thank you guys so much. I know we're at 8 o'clock, but I have about 1 more minute left. And we started a minute after 7, so we're going to be cognizant of your time, but we appreciate your interest and for tuning in this evening and answering all your questions, or asking all your questions. Sorry, we tried to answer as many as we could, but you asked tons, which was wonderful. Please know that we offer one collective perspective of highly selective admissions, and we hope that you'll reach out to other colleges to get a sense of their policies, priorities, and practices as well. We'd like to lift up the resource slide again just quickly. Some folks were asking about that. We can post it, so if we can get that from Q&A, that'd be great to see the resource slide once again. So again, NACAC test optional, you're seeing the making, carrying, comment statement and in big future, so feel free to screen grab that or take a picture quickly. The next one we want to lift up, if you can share, please visit sixcolleges.org and tune in on October 27th. Where we will have a session, our final session on outcomes and opportunity and life after the liberal arts. You can also see our other recorded sessions there, and this one will be posted in a couple days. Please know that we are here as resources, both as deans, our regional deans, and our offices in general. And we couldn't get to all the questions that you asked tonight, but it was great to see so many of you stick with us for the hour. We wish you all the best in the process and best of luck with your college search. Have a great evening and take good care. Thanks, everyone.